What is going on, everybody? This is James Kusnick live on Spreaker Web Radio with another podcast of real steel sports. If you hear any minor background noise throughout the course of this show, that's probably me eating something. I've got cookies and sunflower seeds. I have not eaten much today. I am eating now, and you want the sports? You'll stay tuned because I know you guys are awesome. Anyways, the reason why I decided to do a special on Joe Greene out of the blue is because of the fact that this weekend, the Sunday night game, which will be the Steelers hosting the Ravens, the Steelers are planning to retire Joe Greene's number 75 jersey, making him only the second player aside from number 70, Ernie Stautner, to ever, also defensive lineman, to also have his jersey retired by the Steelers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what Joe Greene meant to the Steelers and also in comparison to other great players. Being in Pittsburgh, you have various radio stations that do sports, such as DVE, such as, Cybel Starkey Miller does 93.7 The Fan. And then you also have, 105.9 The X with Mark Madden. Mark Madden was discussing it today, and you can check it out on his Facebook page. He's super genius. Was talking about who is more important to the Steelers historically, Joe Greene or Terry Bradshaw. And if I hadn't been either A, with his dead cell phone, or B, on the way to class, I probably would have called and, voiced my opinion. But I was thinking about it in the car on the way to my night class tonight. And I feel that Joe Greene, by the slimmest of margins, is the most important player in Steeler history. And there are several reasons. For one, how many truly dominant interior defensive linemen were there before Joe Greene came along? Hardly any. How many guys could take on three blockers every single play, every single snap, every single game throughout the season? Hardly anybody. He did. And he did it. Game in and game out, season in and season out. His productivity was off the charts. Defensive Rookie of the Year, two-time Defensive Player of the Year in 1972, and the Steelers' first Super Bowl year in 1974. Now, I wanted to compare him to Bradshaw for this reason. There are people that will say that, guys like Franco were more important to the offense, or guys like even Mike Webster, Lynn Swann, or Stallworth. True. But the team didn't come together or win anything until Bradshaw started to play good football. That's how I feel about it. I've always felt that Bradshaw is the second most important player in the history of the Steelers, but Joe Greene gets the nod for this reason. Without Bradshaw, if you analyze the Steelers of the 70s, they might get to the Super Bowl against the Vikings. They probably would get the AFC title game and lose to the Raiders in Oakland. You look at the years after that, if you take Bradshaw, the pitcher, put an average quarterback in, then, honestly, you're looking at a team that wouldn't even come close to the Super Bowl. You take out Joe Greene, you do even worse. You know why? Joe Greene was the first guy on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He arrived the same year that Chuck Noll did, 1969. And the way that he more or less made his presence felt, that he was tired of losing, that he wanted to win, it rubbed off on the other players. Guys started to take notice. Guys like Andy Russell, guys like Ray Mansfield. If Joe Greene was never drafted by the Steelers and we got an average defensive lineman in his place, who's to say the Steelers would not have had an average defense throughout the 70s? Because it's a possibility. Now, the next thing about Joe Greene is this. For my money, when people go ahead and talk about the greatest players and defensive players in NFL history, they mention Reggie White. They mention Lawrence Taylor. Joe Greene, to me, is the greatest defensive player in the history of professional football. And here's my reason why. Ready? Because you have sacks, you got numbers, you got, 90s and 80s, posterization and media hype to help Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White. Joe Greene in the 70s, look at what he did game in and game out. Andy Russell has called Joe Greene the player of the decade. In a decade filled with incredible superstars, only one guy was great to him, and that was Joe Greene. Joe Greene, what was so good about him was the fact that he was so versatile, and the fact that he's the reason the Steelers' defense worked. Think about it this way. Joe Greene could take up two guys. Maybe one other guy in the defensive front could take up two guys. Say it's maybe L.C. Greenwood. Dwight White and Ernie Holmes get blocked one-on-one. How do you manage that? How can you honestly try to block all of those guys one-on-one? Because in that short prime from 74 to 76, that 3-year period, there was no blocking that front four. And the reason why that was so great was Joe Greene. Because if he'd have been average and he could have been blocked one-on-one, more pressure could be diverted to L.C. Greenwood and Dwight White. You might have to actually bring extra guys like Ham and Russell and Lambert to get to the quarterback. Joe Greene, taking up those guys, basically meant that Jack Lambert and Andy Russell could handle run support, and Jack Ham could play secondary or cover his end of the field if they tried to sweep to his side. Excuse me. So the way that would work is this. We have the Steelers defense, which ran a cover 2 scheme, which is similar to what Tampa used during the Super Bowl run that they had in 2002. They used the linebackers in coverage, very rarely used them in pass rush, basically used the front four to get to the quarterback. Without Joe Greene, that defense did not work. And there's evidence of that. Warren Sapp. Warren Sapp's one of the best defensive tackles in the history of the game. Tampa's defense doesn't work without him. The same way the Steelers' defense doesn't work without Joe Greene. Because the way he was able to defend, the way he was able to stop the run and get to the quarterback, and the fact that his first years in the NFL, his brute strike made him almost unblockable. Now, in terms of defensive linemen, you look at the greatest defensive linemen of all time. Bob Lilly, Deacon Jones, Reggie White, Bruce Smith, Gino Marchetti. The list goes on and on. Joe Greene stands above them for this reason. He was there when his team was in the shitter, and he was there when his team reached the peak of pro football's mountain. Why is that huge? Here. Because Joe Greene was a mental as well as a physical inspiration that, wow, this guy's coming in and tearing the league up, and what are we doing? We're sitting on our butts, we're being lazy, we basically are giving up. We can't do that. So honestly, without Joe Greene, the Steelers of the 70s would not have been what they were. Which was a defensive, strong defensive, potent offensive team. And Joe Greene's the antithesis. He is the embodiment of that. The way the guy played was incredible too. Play in and play out. That guy just gave it everything he had. And it didn't matter really if he was tired, cramping, hurt, you name it. The guy gave it his all every single snap. How many guys do we know that could do that? There's a very small list, and there's a reason why he's number 1 on mine. Just watching, like I've watched a lot of the old games, and the way he would just dominate the line of scrimmage. He went against Pro Bowl, All-Pro offensive linemen his whole career, and he routinely beat the shit out of them. Think about it this way. If Joe Greene's not there to take a couple guys up, is Lambert going to be free to make the tackle, or is he going to get blocked too? Or is he going to make that errant throw that gives Mel Blount an interception? That's the thing about it. You don't know. This is the one Steeler number, because the Steelers don't like to retire uniforms, that should have been done right when he retired. He retired after the 1981 season. It's been over 30 years since he last played football, and they're just now doing it. For one, I'm glad they're choosing the Sunday night game against the Ravens to fire the crowd up. That would be awesome. But I think what needs to be said here about Joe Greene is this. There are many players that have come along that have embodied what it meant to be a Steeler. That hard-nosed, brute strength, underratedly cerebral, tough kind of player. Didn't mind playing the villain, but loved to be the hero. I think Joe Greene is the perfect embodiment of that. He is the ultimate Steeler. He's the greatest Steeler in the history of the franchise, and in my opinion, he's the greatest defensive player in the history of this game. I don't care about how many sacks that Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White accumulated. I don't care how many interceptions that guys like trying to think of what other good players were interceptors of the football. Like Night Train Lane. Or how good other good tackles like Dick Butkus. Joe Greene, I think, was better than all of them. He was, and still is, the number 1 reason why the Steelers won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. Because the team itself was focused on winning games. But Joe Greene was the embodiment of that focus. And I think also because people wanted to make him happy, and you don't want to get Joe Greene pissed. But yeah. So that Joe Who, in the 1969 newspaper article the day after he was drafted, now they know who he was. The greatest defensive player I ever saw.